Okay, so let's continue with our next video in practice exam question series for the AWS Certified Developer Associate exam. So let's read question number 61. A company is building a web application on AWS. So some web application is on AWS. When a customer send a request, the application will generate reports and then make the reports available to the customer within 1 hour. So some web application uh, customers are hitting, some reports are generating, and that reports are available to the customer. Report should be accessible to the customer for 8 hours. So only there is a time limit that report should be available to the customer just for 8 hours. Some reports are even larger than 1 MB. Each report is unique to the customer. The application should delete all the reports that are older than 2 days. Which solution will meet this requirement for the least operational overhead? So let's go through the question. If you quickly look the question, create, generate the reports and store into DynamoDB. Do you really think like we need to store into the DynamoDB because the size is huge, like 1 MB report, and even larger than the 1 MB. So this large item should not be stored into the DynamoDB. So ideally we can skip this. Generate and store the report in Amazon S3. S3 can be the solution. Generate and report in Amazon S3. Yes, definitely, because it is used to store the large size of object. Generate and store the object in RDS. No, similarly, database. We should not store this large, huge amount of data or per item whose size is huge. We should not store. So B and C. Now let's go through B and C. Generate the report and store the reports in Amazon S3 bucket that uses server-side encryption. Okay, attach the report to an SNS notification. Subscribe the customer to email notification, which looks okay. But what about that customer should be accessible only for 8 hours and report should be deleted within 2 days? Correct. So half conditions are satisfying, half are not. Generate the report and store the object in S3. Generate a pre-signed URL, which looks correct because if you have to give the customer access just for a particular hours, you can generate a pre-signed URL for the object, which has the expiration time, and after that, the once the time has been expired, the URL is no longer being accessed. Along with it, add the S3 lifecycle policy to delete the object. Yes, we can configure the lifecycle policy, like after how many days or after how many hour days, like the object will be deleted. So all the condition is satisfied. C is the correct answer. Question number 62. A company has deployed an application on AWS Elastic Beanstalk. So application, Beanstalk. The company has configured the auto scaling group that is associated with Beanstalk. Okay, so auto scaling group and Beanstalk environment to have 5 Amazon EC2 instances. So we have 5 EC2 instances. If the capacity is fewer than 4 EC2 instances during the deployment, application performance degrades. The company is using all at once deployment policy. So basically, your application is running and currently you have like 5 EC2s are up, but they have mentioned if you have to deploy a new version of your application, like when you deploy something, then there are chances like some EC2 instance go down, right? So, and they have mentioned if total number of EC2 instance will less than the 4, because we have 5. If it go less than the 4, then the application performance degrades. And the company is using all at once deployment policy. All at once means if there are 5, so they are deploying the new version on all 5, which means all the 5 are not available, which means it is going to degrade the performance. So they said which deployment strategy or like what is the most efficient way to solve this deployment issue. So basically we need to change the deployment strategy because all at once will not going to maintain the 4 EC2 instances up. So we need to change the deployment strategy. Change the auto scaling group to 6, which is not making sense because even if you make it 6 and the deployment strategy is all at once, it's not going to even maintain. Change the deployment policy to traffic splitting, specify an evaluation of time. No, this is not a like traffic splitting is kind of a canary deployment, blue and green, which is not going to solve this issue. Change the deployment policy to rolling with additional batch. specify a batch size of 1. That looks correct, because let's suppose you have the 5 EC2 instances, and now you will change the deployment strategy with rolling with additional batch, and the batch size is 1. So you have initially you have 5 instances, and now you said additional batch and batch size of 1, so 5 plus 1 6. 6 instances will be there, and now only one instance at a time is going to update. So one instance is going to deploy, so the remaining 5 still up, which is greater than the 4, which makes sense. D, change the deployment policy to rolling. Specify a batch size of 2, which looks wrong. It doesn't say rolling with additional batch, it just say rolling, which means you have 5 EC2 instances, and out of 5 you are going to deploy the new version on 2 EC2 instances. So if you deploy on 2 EC2 instances, the 2 will be down, the remaining will be 3. So 3 will be up, and which is less than the 4, which is less than the 4, which is asked in the question. So then the condition did not satisfy. So D is also wrong. So C is the correct answer. Question number 63. A developer is incorporating AWS X-ray into an application that handles personal identify information. So X-ray is integrated into application that handles personal identify information. The application is hosted on EC2 instance. The application trace messages include encrypted, because X-ray has been installed, right? X-ray is just to send some trace message, right? And it has mentioned an application is running on EC2. It has mentioned application when send the trace message, it includes PI information, which is going to the CloudWatch. The developer need to ensure that no PI should go outside the EC2 instance, but currently it is going, right? So how the developer, what developer can do? Manually instrument the X-ray SDK in the application code. Definitely correct, because application is sending. So you can write something like X-ray SDK code is already there, which is sending the trace messages. Within that code, you can do something. What kind of logic you can implement, right? Use the X-ray auto instrument agent. So auto instrument agent is not going to like restrict much PI information. Use Amazon Mackie. Totally wrong, because Amazon Mackie is to detect the personal information on the S3 bucket, not on the EC2. But our application is on EC2, and the this identify PI information on EC2. So C is totally wrong. Use AWS distro for open telemetry. Totally wrong. So either A or either B, because it is giving us the more granular access which we can control. So A is the correct answer. Question number 64. A developer is migrating some features from a legacy monolithic application to use AWS Lambda function instead. Okay, the application currently store data in Amazon Aurora DB cluster that run in a private subnet in a VPC. So you can say you have the Lambda because you already migrated, and that Lambda is going to write to the database, but that database is in VPC, and AWS deployed has one VPC. And the Lambda function and the DB cluster are deployed in the same region, in the same AWS account. How the developer to ensure that the Lambda can securely access the DB cluster without crossing the public internet. So basically, it is generally recommended if you have the database into the VPC, the Lambda should also be in the VPC. So the same, we will see like if there is any such option. Configure the DB cluster in public. Totally wrong. We should not put the database into the public VPC. It should be into the private. Configure an RDS database proxy for the Lambda functions. No. Configure a NAT gateway. No. Configure the VPC, subnet, and security group for the totally correct. Like we should deploy the when you are going to deploy the Lambda function, you can give the VPC, and security group is basically because like which port we need to access like inbound and output conditions. So D is the correct answer. Question number 65. A developer is building a new application on AWS. The application use an AWS Lambda function that retrieve information from DynamoDB table. So Lambda function is retrieving information from DynamoDB table. The developer hard coded the DynamoDB table, because code should know which table he should access. So the developer has hard coded the table into the code. The table might have changed over time. Then The developer doesn't want to modify the code. So what is the best way? Best way is the environment variable. Ideally, we should not hard code. If we set in the environment variable, if the table name change, we don't need to change the code. We can just update the environment variable. So create a lambda environment variable to store the table name. Use a standard method for programming to treat the variable. Totally correct. Store the table name in file. No. Create a file to store the table name. Zip the file. No. Create a global variable. No. So A is the correct answer. Question number 66. A company has a critical application on AWS. The application exposes an HTTP API by using Amazon API Gateway. The API is integrated with the Lambda function. So basically, you have the Lambda function which is being accessed by the API Gateway. The application store data in RDS for MySQL DB instance, which has 2 CPU and 64 GB RAM. Basically, this Lambda is basically storing the data into the RDS. Customer have reported that some of the API calls return 500 internal server error. Amazon CloudWatch logs error shows too many connection because Lambda is connecting with the database, and maybe more and more Lambda is trying to connect with the database. So that's why we are getting too many connections. So how you are going to fix this issue? So basically you need to either restrict the number of connection. Uh, the company needs to make the application resilient. The database cannot be down outside the scheduled maintenance hours. Decrease the number of vCPU for the DB instance, increase the max connection. Totally wrong. The connection itself is creating the issue, and if we even increase more, it will get you even the same error, too many connection. Use Amazon RDS proxy to create a proxy that connect to the database. Update the Lambda function to connect to the proxy. Totally correct. So what it will said, within the RDS, there is option called RDS proxy. So rather than connecting Lambda connect directly with the database, it will connect to the proxy. So all the Lambda, so let's suppose you have the 100 Lambda. So all the 100 Lambda is going to connect with the proxy, and then proxy will connect to the database. So if you are 100 Lambda uh, directly connect with the database, then 100 connection is going to be open. But if 100 Lambda is going to connect the proxy, and the proxy is going to make a connection, and whatever the connection string it is going to return, and that string is going to use by all the Lambda. But basically proxy just open one or two or few connection rather than all the 100 connection. So B is the correct approach. Add a CloudWatch alarm that change in DB instance. No, we should not change the DB instance. Add a major event bridge that increase the max connection setting. No. So B is the correct answer. Okay, question number 67. A company has installed smart meters in all customer location. The smart meters measure power usage at 1 minute interval and send the user reading to remote endpoint for collection. So wherever the smart meter has been installed, they are just sending some readings. The company needs to create an endpoint that will receive the smart meter reading and store the reading into the database. So basically, we need to receive the reading and store into the database. The company want to store the location ID and timestamp. The company want to give its customer low latency access to their current usage and historical usage on demand. The company expect demand to increase. The solution must not impact performance or include or downtime. Which solution will meet this requirement most? So basically, we need to see in which database we should store a location ID and timestamp information, and also the historical usage. So basically, the customer want to see the historical data as well. So store the smart meter reading into the RDS database, create an index. You can do that, but it is not scalable, and it has not a very like low latency access, and not uh, generally recommended for the time series data, basically historical usage. So DynamoDB is generally prefer. Store the smart meter reading in DynamoDB, totally correct. Create a composite key by using location ID and timestamp column, correct, because we need to store the timestamp. Use the columns to filter, definitely correct. Store the reading elastic cache, no, this is just in memory. Store the reading into Amazon S3, no, this is not correct. So either A or either B, so B is more preferable. So B is the correct answer. Question number 68. A company is building a serverless application that uses AWS Lambda functions. The company need to create a set of test events to test the Lambda function. Basically, when you create a Lambda function in the UI, you can pass some test event, right? So that company want to create some set of test events in a development environment. The test events will be created once and will be used by all the developers in the IAM developer group. The test event must be editable by any of the IAM user in the IAM developer group. So basically, you need to create a share, like when you create a test event, there are some settings. Do you want to shareable? Do you want to create a shareable event or not? If you create a shareable event, then all the developer within that group, particular group, can access that particular events. So create and store the test event in Vision S3. No. Create the test event. Configure the event sharing settings to make it test shareable events. Yes, correct. Create and store the test event in DynamoDB. No. Create the test event. Configure the event sharing setting to make the test event private. No. We need to make it shareable rather than the private. B is the correct. Question number 69. A developer is configuring an application deployment environment in code pipeline. Okay. The application code is in a GitHub. Okay. The developer wants to ensure that the repository package unit test run in the new deployment environment. So basically, what developer want, unit test should run. The developer has already set the pipeline source provider to GitHub and has specified the repository and branch to use. Okay, so what should we do if you want to run? So within the pipeline, you can add a one more stage. Basically, in the build stage, generally we run the test. So let's see. We need to choose two options. Create a AWS code commit project. No, code commit is just to store the code, and we are not using code commit. We are using GitHub. So A is wrong. Create an AWS code build project. Okay, add the repository package build and test command. Yes, correct. Because one stage is already there, that is the checkout stage, and now we need to run the test. So test generally run into the build stage, so we need to create a code build project, and we can add a test command into the build spec.html file. So B looks correct. Create a code deploy project. No, test should not run into the code deployment, it should be into the build one. Add an action to the source stage. Specify the newly created project as an action provider. Specify the build artifact as an okay. Add a new stage. So basically, we already have one stage, that is checkout. So you already created a build project, but that project needs to be added to the code pipeline, right? So add an action to the source stage. No, we need to add an extra stage. Add a new stage to the pipeline. So this looks correct. So B and E. Question number 70. An engineer created an A/B test of a new feature on a Amazon CloudWatch evidently project. The engineer configured two variants of the feature, variation A and variation B, for the test. The engineer want to work exclusively with variation A. So he wants to just work with variation A. The engineer need to make update so that variation A is the only variant that appears when the engineer hits the application endpoint. So basically they want, we need to restrict this particular variant only for the particular engineer or particular user. How you can do that? Add an override to the feature. Set the identifier of the override to the engineer user ID. Set the variation to the variation. Yes, if the request is coming, it is coming from particular ID, we can set the ID to the user ID, and we can set the variation to the variation, so that if the request is coming from the particular user ID, it will always go to the variation. So A looks correct. Set an override to the feature, set the identifier of the override to the variation A, set the variation. If you do that, the existing user will be impacted. Set an experiment to the project, set the identifier of the variation B, set the variation B to 0. If you do that, all the user will be impacted, but we want only the particular engineer. Add an experiment to the project, set the identifier of the experiment to the AWS account. No, we need to specify to the user. So A looks correct. So that's it. That's the end of the video, and thank you.